As everyone approaches politicians and elections that are coming up, well, all the time, because it seems like elections never end, what do you think makes up these politicians? Who are these guys who are presumed to rule us? Generally speaking, do you trust the campaign promises of politicians? Yes or no? Think about it. Okay, how about another question? Generally speaking, an honest politician is more likely to win an election than a dishonest politician. You say yes or no? Okay, now the third question. Generally speaking, the moral standards of politicians are higher than my own moral standards. Yes or no? What do you think about these three? Now, if your answer is anything like those of everywhere I've ever been, given this talk and talked about politicians, generally speaking, your answer would be no to every one of these questions, just like it is for so many people that I've asked. Now, isn't that interesting, that people have an overwhelming distrust of politicians? They don't trust their campaign promises, generally speaking. They may think of one particular person in mind that they have confidence in, but overwhelmingly, the view of politicians is quite abysmal. Generally speaking, people don't think that honest politicians have an edge in elections. The dishonest person, and the one who's going to promise anything to anybody, has an edge over somebody who's truly honest about what the situation is and what they're able to deliver. And generally speaking, they think that scoundrels then are the ones that are more likely to get elected, and they don't have as good moral standards as the people who would be electing them. So they overwhelmingly say that, and you're actually in good company when you come to these national surveys. In the United States, a survey was asking what do people think about the honesty and ethical standards of people in different professions? And politicians always rank pretty much at the bottom. I mean, in the United States, in one survey that I show here, they rank just slightly above prostitutes and used car salesmen. And in a sense, that does a disservice to prostitutes and used car salesmen because they don't have force at their disposal like politicians do to compel people to do things and to impose their will on others. But now let's take another question. Government in general versus politicians in particular here. Generally speaking, do you trust that government will do good and necessary things for the country? Now, when I ask this, I'm curious how you'll respond. Do you say yes, they will do good and necessary things for the country, or no, they won't? Well, I have to say that overwhelmingly, the response that I've gotten when I ask this question all around the country, all around the world, is people say, well, yes. Now, isn't this odd that people will think such poor things about the people who make up government? But government as a whole becomes sort of an entity beyond the politicians. It becomes something good and necessary that most people believe in. Now, I would say that this is the result of popular myths. And these are not just recent myths. These are age-old, through the history of humankind. In Hawaii, for example, we have a myth about King Kamehameha the Great. Hawaii is an island out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and every year in June they have a holiday, a special holiday for King Kamehameha the Great. They call him King Kamehameha the Great because he united the islands. Well, how did he do that? Well, he did so by essentially killing more people than anybody else. He forcibly compelled all of the islands under his rule and control by killing thousands of people, which brings us to that sort of awful realization that throughout history, we say that if you kill, well, you're a murderer. But if some great killer does it on a massive scale, then he's a great national hero. And so King Kamehameha has this big statue in Hawaii called King Kamehameha the Great. And we have leis and parades and all kinds of celebrations urging the children to be more like him and to hold him up as a hero. Now, it's interesting that just a few weeks later in America, we have a a holiday of 4th of July, Independence Day. And there we're celebrating the actions of George Washington and all of those people who fought a war called the American Revolution against England in order to break away from King George III. You know, King George III didn't want the colonies to break away from England. The British Empire was great and all around the world. Why should they break away? But the colonists thought he was oppressive and tyrannical, and they believed that these were not tolerable for people with rights, individual rights. So they broke away, and they were successful. So they celebrate Independence Day, 4th of July, parades and fireworks and everything celebrating this. And then we have another holiday that's celebrating two presidents. I mean, their birthdays were fairly close together. So on President's Day, not only do we honor all presidents, but especially these two that are highly revered in America. George Washington, who was the hero of independence, breaking away from England, separating from the forced union. And we have the celebration of Abraham Lincoln, who is celebrated for an opposite reason, essentially forcing the union. Southern states wanted to break away from the northern states, and Abraham Lincoln didn't believe in that. His objective, above all, regardless of every other cause, was to keep the union together. So we have essentially opposite purposes. So what are we teaching our children? Are we teaching them independence, or are we teaching them forced union? And it seems that the main thing that we're teaching them is that we celebrate heroes who won in battle. I mean, it's not because one cause was the opposite of the other. It was the fact that they won. If the other side had won, we'd probably be celebrating, we'd be celebrating King George III because he defeated those colonists who were rebelling against his rule. Or we would celebrate the Confederates, the Southerners, who broke away and finally won victory against the Northerners who were trying to force them into an unwanted union. So there we have a contradiction. And as a matter of fact, America is filled with contradictions. We have many presidents who also helped secessionist movements around the world. We have the Americans, before the American Civil War, helped Texas to separate from Mexico. We were helping the Texans, the people of Texas, to find independence from Mexico. We also later helped Panama in its secession movement from Colombia. We helped Kosovo in its secession movement from Serbia. I mean, American history is filled with lots of examples of helping secessionist movements. Well, now, if we really revered the object of Abraham Lincoln, keeping a union together, then why do we fight wars and have people die for these opposite purposes? Well, I would say that much of it boils down to this purification ritual. It allows people to do things that they would never be allowed to do on an individual basis. But as rulers of great countries or great nations, they're allowed to do it, in fact, sanctioned by the general population. Consider how throughout history people have used the stars, tea leaves, chicken bones, tarot cards, hand palms, head bumps, all kinds of things to sort of to give justification to rulers who wanted to do things that we would never be allowed to do alone. For example, to lie, to covet, to steal, and to kill. Each one of these things is wrong if you try to do it by yourself. Every society would condemn that kind of behavior by you acting against society. But if one individual does these things on a grand scale, on a massive scale, lying, coveting, stealing, and killing, why then they are considered great national heroes, destined for righteous rule. As time went on, we got away from many kinds of superstitions, and the one that became the dominant throughout history was the one called the divine right of kings. Throughout the world, certain rulers were presumed to have the right to rule over their kingdom and over all the people in their realm, because it was presumed that God, or the gods, in the Greek cases and the Egyptian cases and the cases of Japan and China, all around the world, people were thought to have been given the right to rule others and to do the lying, the coveting, the stealing, and the killing because they were victors in battle. That was the proof that God was on their side, and therefore a justification for this kind of behavior. So the divine right of kings served as a justification for certain powerful people to lie, to steal, to covet, to kill with impunity, because the whole of society seemed to sanction what they were doing. It was said to be kind of condoned by God or the gods in various societies because they won in battle. And victory in battle was proof that God was on their side. Otherwise, the other side would have won. And they had a right to rule not only for themselves, but for their children and their grandchildren until someone else came along and won, and then the gods were on their side. That was the right to rule. Now, the divine right of kings has fallen away to a great extent. We still have monarchs all around the world, in the Scandinavian countries, many European countries, Saudi Arabia and Japan and Tonga, and many countries still have monarchs who rule in a constitutional constrained effort, but their children are born to a superior station in life and they carry on the monarchy concept. But the power has been handed over to a different kind of divine right. This is the divine right of majorities, not the divine right of kings, where people almost everywhere in the world believe in this sort of democratic notion that democracy isn't the ruling of yourself. Democracy is the ruling of others by the showing of hands. The raising of large number of hands can essentially impose the will of a great number of people over a small number of people, regardless of what their cause or purpose is. So the divine right of majorities has been replaced. Well, there are people who always stood against this. I mean, from ancient of times, there were people like Lao Tzu or Juan de Mariana, John Locke, Henry David Thoreau, Thomas Paine, Adam Smith, many people who challenged this, arguing that individuals have rights based on a natural right to their own life and their liberty and their property, regardless of how many people oppose them, that numbers of people don't determine morality and rights and legal things. And this always stood against the involuntary coercion over individual decision-making that was done by the divine right of kings or the divine right of majorities. This is what I call the philosophy of liberty. These people who stood against the power of some to lie, to covet, to steal, and to kill. The philosophy of liberty is a basis for leveling all people in society to having the same rights. That was asserted in the Declaration of Independence in the United States, that we hold all these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, let me pause to give you a brief animated rendition of this philosophy of liberty. Now, suppose that we put you in the position of the normal politicians of life, that we say that you are in a position to make political decisions for other people, and that some people come to you. If you were in a political position to pass a law to raise the price of bread, 1 penny per loaf of bread for the whole country, would you accept $10,000 from bread makers to raise the price of bread? Okay, it's an interesting proposition. The condition is this: it's 100% risk-free. In other words, there's no legal penalty for doing this, and it's secret. Nobody really will know about it. It's a secret action. Would you yes, or would you no? Another possibility is, suppose that the price goes up. The only thing that changes now is that instead of offering you $10,000, you're offered $1 million. How many people say, would you say yes to this, or would you say no to this? Well, now let's change it ever so slightly again. Let's say that you're still offered $1 million, and there's no legal penalty, but it's not secret. Everybody will know about it. Now, would you do it, or would you not do it? Now, let's change the condition again just a little bit more. Suppose there's a 10% risk of 1% of 1 year in jail, because there is some legal ramification about this, that maybe there's a chance you might go to jail, and you might spend 3 years in jail. No, you might go to jail for a year, but when you get out, you still get to keep the money. Another possibility, and this is the next condition, yes or no, there's a 50% chance of going to jail for 3 years, and you don't get to keep the money. That's but there's only 50% chance that you'll get caught, and maybe another 50% chance you won't. Would you still do it for $1 million? Yes or no? Now ask this same kind of question, and how about for other people? Should this kind of money-influenced politicians be legal in society, where politicians can be essentially bribed, paid $1 million to influence their vote, to give subsidies to bread makers? Should this be legal? Now, overwhelmingly, when I ask this to people, the people say it should be illegal to do. 100% of people say it should be illegal to do. But interestingly, most people have said that they would do it anyway. For example, when I ask everywhere that I've asked this kind of question, I get a general response to this degree, where it's $1 million, but 100% risk-free and secret. 95% of the people in any room or any audience that I give this to say, yeah, they'd do it. And their answers, their explanations for this is that, well, if everyone is doing it, then I must be crazy. It must be okay. Or if everyone is doing it, then I'd be a dummy not to take the bribe. Or I'd be more popular if I have $1 million. If I didn't do it, then someone else would just do it. And my vote is just one of a few hundred in legislators, so I'm not really responsible. It's blended by many people. There are some people who would still do it if it's not secret, but the numbers drop a little bit to 75% saying that they do it. But some of them say, well, no, I wouldn't, because if it isn't secret, people would probably hate me. They might think badly of you. I'd do it for the money, but not if everyone knows, because they will just think I just want this for my own benefit. If there's no risk, then why not? But not if everyone knows. If secret, yes. No, if not secret. My reputation is worth more than that. Okay, but then when you go to the other kind of circumstance where you're saying, well, there's a 50% chance of 3 years in prison, that's when the numbers drop a lot. There are a few, maybe 8% who would still do it, taking the 50-50 chance and winding up with $1 million. But 92% say no, and they give their reasons. No, if there's a chance of going to jail, I don't want to do it. No, jail sucks. No, $1,000,000 isn't worth the legal costs or jail time. No, going to jail isn't worth it. No, going to jail isn't in my self-interest. Now, overwhelmingly, when I ask people, should it be illegal for other people to do so? They say, well, yes, it should be illegal for other people to do this. But still, most of them would do it themselves. 95% would do it themselves. The most interesting aspect of this whole survey is the 5% who say they won't do it, even if it's secret, even if it's $1,000,000, and even if it's perfectly legal. There's no risk to them. Still 5% won't do it. And why, I ask? Well, they say, well, I believe it's wrong, or I believe it's not ethical. And basically what they're saying is that a person should not be using their position of public trust for their own personal gain at the expense of the general population. Now, there's a very big, important message here. A lot of people have done studies of group behavior, and that's a very important 5%, because they set up the dissenter's role. They give the ethical argument against corruption and bribes in every country. Now, bribes and corruption exist in every country, but to differing degrees. And the work of Solomon Asch after World War II, trying to explain the group behavior after World War II, was trying to find out, well, what is the role of the dissenter? Somebody who goes against the crowd, goes against the group, and stands with moral principle. And it's a very strong and powerful factor in causing many other people to also follow their own personal moral and ethical guidance, rather than just going along with the crowd and saying, well, if everybody's doing it, I might as well do it too. And you find that around the world that there's a high degree of corruption wherever there are high measures of governmental control, because there's lots of favors to sell, lots of favors to benefit your friends and to punish your enemies. In the Corruption Perceptions Index that's produced by Transparency International, they show that, well, all countries in the world have varying degrees of corruption. One country I was in recently shows that their cases improved a bit. In recent years, the Ukraine went from, in 2011, from rank of 152 up to 130 in about 4 years. Well, that's a good improvement. But why are they still way down there at the bottom? Why is there so much corruption there? And it has to be related to all the opportunities in a controlled society for officials to sell favors and to punish their enemies. So my advice to people everywhere is to try to set up a system of within your own country where there aren't the opportunities to sell favors, because there always will be people who will take advantage of those things. But the lesson always is stand to principle and be the dissenter, because you'll have a great influence on many of those around you who will stand up against that too. And that's one of the reasons why there's little corruption in the Scandinavian countries, because there's a strong concern about what other people think and feel. And if there are dissenters who stand up for principle and against corruption, they feel a lot of pressure to go along with that. It isn't always a problem. It is a solution. In many of the countries that are at the top of the list in terms of very little corruption within the country, still they tend to be some of the most pervasive in practicing corruption outside their country in international commerce and trade. But it always brings us to this point here of the Iron Triangle. In every country, there are special interest groups, whether it be farmers or military contractors or banks, that are special interest groups trying to pay politicians for favors. In America, it's called campaign contributions, but in most countries of the world, it's just outright payoffs and bribes. They pay these politicians for enormous use of their influence, such as the bread makers passing a law that will set up an agency of government to raise the price of bread all across the country, which brings enormous benefits. Now, in the case of the sugar industry in the United States, you could say that for $2 million in campaign contributions every year, the the government agencies have provided as much as $3 billion worth of subsidies and higher food prices and trade restrictions and all that benefit the sugar industry by as much as $3 billion a year. Well, that's an enormous reward. For every dollar of payoff, they get $1,500 of reward. There's no better investment anywhere in the world than a well-placed politician who can get this kind of favor. And so I'd say that this is a kind of corruption that's built into every country of the world, needs to be guarded against by reducing the kinds of favors that politicians have to hand out. Because if they don't have any favors to hand out, they can't be. No one's going to try and bribe them because they don't have any favors to hand out. Now, there are various philosophies of economics that fuel this kind of favor that politicians have. Those on one end of the economic spectrum that have the greatest control over society is the command economy with 100% government control. And in that case, the government owns everything. It owns the means of production, what is to be produced, how it's to be produced, and for whom it's to be produced. And this is the communist society, where everything is run by the rulers, and no individuals have any rights to make any decisions. Others in society, another realm on the economic spectrum, is the Keynesian school, that allows the ownership of society to be owned by individuals, but they control it and manipulate it by massive spending and tax policies and debt policies that try to regulate and manipulate the economy, often to the ends of politicians. And there's the monetarist school that allows hands off with regard to government spending and taxation, but has a tremendous influence over the economy by its banking policies, interest rates, money supply, which is a tremendous distortion of transferring wealth from the poor to the rich, and banking regulation, which is services the very interests that they tend to be, that they say they're regulating. And then there's the Austrian school of thought that says that all of these schools of thought are manipulating the economy to the benefit of powerful people, and that the only way to diminish power is to diminish all of those favors that government has to hand out. And that is the school of a very minimal role for government, of simply protecting people, police, courts, and defense, and letting the rest of society alone. And there are some Austrians that say even those things that are the most important, the police, courts, and defense, can be handled more effectively and more efficiently in a society of competition and choice rather than coercion and monopoly. And so then that is a school of thought that I recommend to everyone listening to this program, the Austrian School of Economic, which minimizes the opportunities for corruption and damage to a society. Ultimately, I believe that it is the most practical, because it brings the greatest benefits to society by allowing people to pursue their own ends. It is humane, because it brings the greatest benefits of society to a growing amount of wealth for the society. And it is ethical, because it is treating people as we would want them to treat us if we were in their shoes. It is ethical because it doesn't rely on coercion, it relies on voluntarism.